Good evening. I'm so glad you're going to stay with us for the next half hour here on PBS Fort Wayne. I'm Sandy Thomson, and the name of the show is Life Ahead. Why that name? Well, it's because we like to give you information and education here on PBS throughout our programming all week long. But specifically on this show, we like to give you some information or education that might help you with decisions that you have to make in your life ahead. And this evening, we're looking at some life decisions for afterlife, if you will. In fact, we're going to be talking about how to manage your end-of-life affairs. So we have with us this evening an attorney that you've met before, and you'll meet him again here in just a moment. We'll look at the legal aspects of that, and we have a funeral director here tonight as well. Now, this is really your show. I get to ask them questions until you give us calls, but we encourage and love it when you give us calls, and the number you can see is down there on the bottom of the screen, and that'll be up here off and on throughout the rest of the show, 969-2720. Any question you have pertaining to that subject, please give us a call here, and we love it if you stay on the phone with us and talk to us live here on the air. That way, if Jarod or Troy have questions back to you, you're right there on the phone. If you're not comfortable doing that, we don't care. You can even give us a fake name if you want. And if you want to just give us our question, the phone operator will type that up and send it out here to the studio to me, and I can read it off of the teleprompter to my guests. Okay, I know you want to meet him now. I've chatted enough about what the show's about. But again, our guests, you've met Troy. This is Troy, by the way, Troy Kiefer, who is the attorney specializing in elder law.
Yep, that's the area I work in primarily, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you again.
Oh, thank you, Troy. He always has such good stuff to share with us, so thank you very much. And he's invited to come with him, Jarod Steffen. So nice to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're funeral director.
Yes.
You're open to any questions people might have pertaining to that subject.
Yes,
well, you get
course.
those questions every day.
Every day,
sure.
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I do want you to feel comfortable to ask any questions that you might have about end of life. And we want to talk about pre-planning funerals mainly this evening. Why are we talking about this? Troy, does this legally and as the funeral home, how do you work together?
Right. Well, from a legal standpoint, of course, we work a lot with estate documents.
Okay.
So wills, powers of attorney, appointment of healthcare representatives, and those straddle the line between when a person's living and then what happens after a person passes away.
Right.
And so we handle the legal part of things, and of course Jarod handles the personal and those other types of things as well.
Those decisions, afterlife decisions, if you will. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but from so many of attorneys being here on the show, to emphasize again that a power of attorney is while you're still living. This is the person that maybe if you're not capable anymore can help you with finances or getting bills paid, represent you, if you will. And then after you pass away, it's the trustee that then takes care of all of that, right?
Could be a trustee of a trust, might be the personal representative.
Oh, okay, the PR, if you, okay.
Right, and then now with the new law, dealing with healthcare representatives, it might be a healthcare representative too, could have some authority to make afterlife decisions.
All right, so then Jarod, let's say that someone has passed away. Who comes and talks to you? Is it the attorney? Is it the personal representative, the power of attorney?
Yeah, so typically it's the family, the next of kin that would come and we would sit down with them. In a situation where there's a prearranged funeral, again, we would be speaking to the family member or the person that maybe Troy has helped appointed to make those arrangements. And so we're working with them. We're using the prearranged funeral, as a guide for the decisions and for maybe what was selected and ultimately what was maybe even prepaid.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's focus on that here for a little while. Pre-planning and prepaying. Then too, that from what I'm just hearing generally, seems to be kind of a trend now that more people are doing that. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing more and more of that. I think people look at it as a responsibility that they have to their family and to their loved ones to get the details, kind of taken care of and laying a good, start for, as people get older, a start in making those decisions. And so, many funeral homes, all funeral homes I know in the area will sit down with you. Most it's a free service where they'll sit down with you and they'll ask questions and find out exactly what kind of funeral, what kind of end-of-life arrangements you want to have. And then you can take it one step further and actually prepay for those services.
Do most people do that? I mean, prepay if
yes,
they've gone ahead and...
most people do that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so here's a hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you have made those arrangements, the afterlife arrangements with a funeral home,
Mm-hmm.
and you've made all the plans from the music to choosing a casket, everything.
Yeah.
But then you go out of business. What happens to all that money you prepaid?
Yeah, so when someone prepays their funeral, where the money is actually going, a family is not putting that money in, giving it to the funeral home.
Okay.
It's actually going into a funeral trust.
Okay.
And many funeral homes work with a trust company that, and so if a funeral home would go out of business or a funeral home would change ownership or something would happen where you wouldn't feel comfortable anymore,
Sure.
that can easily, these products and the trust money, it's very consumer friendly. It can be transferred to any other funeral home that you'd like.
That's comforting, I think, for
It
a lot of
is,
people
yeah.
because, I've talked to people that are like a little unsure. Like, what if I change
Yeah.
my mind in the next 5 years or 10 years until
Yeah.
Grandpa's not here anymore?
That's right.
You know,
Yeah.
Troy, when a client comes to you, maybe they're initially coming to do estate planning or take care of some of those documents, power of attorney or doing their will, things like that. Do they often ask you about pre-planning funerals, or do you just refer them? How does that work?
Yeah. I would say I'm not asked in the majority of the time.
Okay.
It's seldom asked. And I think people have a problem facing their mortality, some people more than others. And I think it's a lot for them to at least come and talk to me, talk about their will and get that arranged. And I do mention it, but sometimes it's just one step too far. They have to ease into it.
Sure.
And so it's something I certainly recommend, but it's a process, and it's part of the overall way to work your way through that process.
Yeah, it can be pretty tough, and you are the face person for a lot of people that having to deal with the legal parts of it. And Jarod, we talked about it being a hard process. I've known two different cases where someone has pre-planned and prepaid for their funeral, and their family was thrilled because they're so emotional anyway, and they're grieving and they're having a really hard time, and they don't want to go to the funeral home and make all these decisions the same day or in a couple of days, and they really appreciated that. They knew exactly what music they wanted. They knew, what they wanted to be dressed in, or just all of the. What are some of the decisions people would make?
Yeah, you've named a lot of them, but what kind of service do you want to have? Do you want to have a service at a church or at a funeral home? Are you wanting to be cremated? Are you wanting to be buried? What type of casket? What type of urn? Music, food. I mean, there is, like what you've said, a lot. And you're right, Sandy, when it is such a gift to families. And it is. My job mainly at the funeral home is to sit down with a family after a death has occurred. So I get to see firsthand what you just described as, it's such a blessing to families who in a time where they are very much grieving.
Right.
They have a lot of other decisions that are upon them. It's nice to have that all planned out, and it's just a different feeling in that arrangement room when a funeral is pre-planned, prepaid, taken care of. There's just a relief over the room.
You know, one of the things I think that I've heard mentioned, that it takes away any guilt. Like, you know, maybe even between the siblings, if they're trying to make these decisions with you or someone, and choosing whatever it is, the casket or the this or that, and one brother says this, and then the sister says, no, mom would like this better, and they're arguing over like what mom or dad or whatever would like, and yet if it's pre-planned, it's like, hey, this is what mom wanted. Even if I don't like it, that's what she wanted, that's what we're doing.
That's right, yeah. And it really, another thing that it does is there are so many, when you're in a time of hurt and grieving, you know, you'll make decisions based on that emotion that you typically don't feel, you know, because you're going through something so difficult. And so to make those decisions where there is no emotional stress, it's just much easier.
Well, I can see it being maybe a benefit for, you know, the actual person themselves, the elder person, or maybe they're not so elderly, that goes and makes the decisions and plans it all and whatever. Maybe for them to even take a family member or two with them.
Yeah.
Does that happen sometimes?
Absolutely. Yeah, we meet. In fact, we encourage that, to bring other family members with you when you come to do the planning. It just it's nice to have a few other voices and you know, to talk through it as a family.
And then the family would also know that, hey, this is what mom or dad or whatever grandpa wanted. I heard him say that. You know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. What about legalities, Troy? Do you have to have any kind of a legal document if you've pre-planned your funeral?
Well, that certainly helps, pre-planning your funeral. Pre-planning is more about providing the resources, paying for it, giving direction. It isn't necessarily something that is legally binding. So it's something that you would really want to talk to your attorney about. Make sure that the person you appoint as healthcare representative knows what your wishes are. There's also a funeral planning declaration.
What is that?
That's a separate form provided for by state statute. And it's very simple. It gives you a way to fill out what your wishes are. And once you sign that, and it has to be witnessed, that does have the effect of law. And Jarod can really speak to that because he has more experience working with those than I do, because he's on that side of things. But
can you change that? If you change your mind?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it is revocable. You can make changes at any time. But that is a big step towards making sure, at least illegally, that you're getting what you wanted. What you would like, right?
Okay, yeah. Jump in here, Jarod, since you deal with that specifically.
Yeah, I would just definitely encourage, again, kind of just going off of what Troy is saying, is the funeral declaration. You know, a lot of that has to do with kind of what you want to happen.
Yeah.
We also recommend, you know, putting together a healthcare representative that can represent you, the person to make, you know, the final arrangements, to make the decisions if you don't have a funeral declaration. But both is great too. I mean, the important thing is getting out ahead, making the decisions. Who is going to, you know, be in charge of this funeral? Who is going to be making these decisions? And what do I want? You know. Yeah. So, yeah.
We've had a call here tonight from James. James, thank you so much for watching Life Ahead here, and I appreciate you giving us a call here. James wants to know, how often do people write their own wills? This question's for you, Troy.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you, James. That's a very good question. Frankly, I don't see that very often. Legally, a person can write their own will, and there's nothing magic about having an attorney involved in it. The important part, though, is that there are certain formalities that have to be followed, in order for that document to be legally effective. And that means that it has to be, of course, signed. There have to be a couple of witnesses. And you only get one shot at it. By the time you figure out that it's not been properly prepared, it's too late to make any changes. So a person can express their wishes in a will, but you want to make sure that it's done legally and so that it has proper effect.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. As far as wills, we know, as you've told us before, Troy, you can change them, but make sure that what your final document is what you want.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, you can change wills at any time. Right?
Would you, for example, in a will, since we're talking about pre-planned funerals and prepaid funerals, would you in a will put specific information like that, like a certain funeral home that you would choose, or anything specific like that?
That's also a very good question, Sandy, because that's a misconception that I often see.
Oh, yeah?
People will often just assume that those types of directions will be in their will. But the fact of the matter is, the will really isn't even looked at until much later after the funeral.
Good point.
And in fact, when people call me and say, Mom passed away last night, what do we do?
Yeah.
I tell them, contact the funeral home, and then just spend the next couple of weeks being with family.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the legal side of things. We'll deal with the will later. But frankly, by the time the will comes into it, the funeral's
done.
already done and over.
And maybe some other decisions were made that weren't really what they wanted in the will.
Right.
That's good. That's all right. So remember that, folks. Remember that for sure.
There are other documents that we've talked about tonight that will take the place of the will and do a much better job.
Okay, all right. Jarod, with you meeting so many clients every week, every month as a funeral director, what are some of the most common, I don't want to say problems, but difficulties that come up that you'd like to share with viewers? Like if you just did this or this or this, it would be easier.
Yeah, it's a hard time for everyone. I want to acknowledge that. It's not an easy time. So, the more that you can do ahead of time, the better. I would say some of the things like, especially is not talking about, funeral decisions as a family. Getting, especially men, I think we tend to want to just do what's simplest, would maybe relieve burden from other family members. But the reality is, a funeral is for those that are still living.
Yeah.
And so to create a proper, environment of healing and just support, you want to think about those that are what would be best for those that are left behind.
All right, that's a really good way to look at it, and it's good to be reminded of that. Do you have many legal situations, Troy, after someone has passed away and after they've had a funeral that family comes to you about, or do you think most things are planned and prepared for beforehand?
Well, there certainly is that potential of conflict, and I think Jarod pointed out that families going through a very difficult, stressful time, probably one of the worst times in their lives.
Well, yeah.
And that can bring out a lot of good in people, and it can bring out some bad too. And everything just seems to be amplified during those periods of time. And if there's any friction between family members, that's usually when it's going to come out. So sometimes we do deal with issues during the funeral period, directly after. So it's a time of transition and really a time, like I said, that things could really come to the surface.
Or maybe, if I'm guessing correctly, since we've talked about this sort of thing before, that some decisions you might have to take to a probate judge to decide if you can't get the siblings to decide. Is that correct?
There's that potential. Yes, if no one's been appointed to make those decisions. I know state statute, it has a last resort priority list of people who makes decisions. But there is that potential that it could end up in court just like any other controversy.
Okay. All right. Well, we've talked about, pre-planning your funeral, and You mentioned it earlier in one of your answers, Jarod. Cremation, how is that different in terms of somebody pre-planning a funeral as opposed to somebody who's going to purchase a cemetery plot and have a traditional funeral?
Yeah, cremation now it's been around long enough. That in the industry here we have figured out a few things and noticed different trends. Actually, Sandy, a lot of times with cremation, probably most of the time, people still have a funeral, but instead, just like you would typically have with burial, where you have some sort of gathering together, and maybe you have someone come and speak and share memories, and so kind of more of a traditional funeral. But instead of going to the cemetery, the funeral would just end at the church or at the funeral home, and the cremation would take place. So there's still, even with cremation, there are a lot of options. Sometimes we would
what? What do you mean? What are different options?
So for instance, do you want to have a service with a viewing?
I see.
Do you want to have just what we would call a memorial service or a celebration of life?
Yeah.
Do you want to have a private gathering for your family, and then something different for the public? Do you want to have just a very simple cremation? So those are all things that you would have to decide on and plan. You also have, what kind of urn you would want to select. Again, music and just different those types of decisions. So really, whether you choose burial or cremation, it doesn't matter to us. It's just what we just really try to encourage is, getting those plans down and planned beforehand.
Yeah, and doing what that person would want. And like you said, there are so many different ways now, but it's becoming more common.
Yes.
I had attended a funeral last year where they actually had a viewing, open house kind of a viewing for the public, and had the service at the funeral home, had a nice service. Then they cremated the body, and then later, a couple of weeks later, then they had just a private family service to bury the urn. I think is what they ended up doing.
That's a very common way now, yes.
Okay, well, we can't not talk about money, but we can't talk about money, by the way, not specifically. And the reason we don't is because things can change. I mean, if we gave you an amount right now of what it would cost for Troy to do your will, or what a certain funeral would cost, that may change in the next week or next couple months, and you may be watching this show again and we've given you information that's not correct anymore. So we don't want to give a specific number amount, but here's my question, Jarod. If you prepay for your funeral, but you don't die for 5 or 7 more years, and charges have changed, can you be charged more, or how does that work?
Yeah, so that's one of the great benefits about it is that you can lock in funeral home service costs. And so whether you live if you pre-plan and prepay, whether you live another 2 years or another 20 years, those services are typically going to be guaranteed by the funeral home. Yeah, so it's really a wonderful benefit.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
it's very good to know. Maybe another way to economize or save some money ahead of time.
Yeah.
Mark has called in, and Mark, thank you so much for watching us here on Life Ahead. And he says, if someone prepays their funeral, can they later on transfer the money for nursing home costs? That's a good question.
I think that's going to come down to what right they have to undo that pre-planning, and if they're
Would that depend on the funeral home? Or is it different for different funeral homes?
Yeah, I would imagine it would depend on the funeral home and that trust that
Oh,
Jarod
that you
mentioned,
set up.
and exactly what right they have to withdraw those funds. And I think if they could withdraw the funds, typically they could withdraw them and spend that money on anything, including nursing homes.
So it's like revocable or irrevocable trust.
Right. Most people put the money in an irrevocable trust, and so when you do that, then the answer to Mark's question is no, you couldn't take that money out. But the advantage of putting it into an irrevocable funeral trust is the money is protected if someone does go on to Medicaid or other benefits, bankruptcy, and different things.
That money that you put in there and prepaid,
it's protected.
It's still there,
and it doesn't count as an asset. Yeah.
You know, I have probably 1,000 more questions I could ask you, and I know that many of you at home probably have more questions. Good topic. Thank you for bringing that to us, Troy. And I want to thank Jarod as well for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Sandy.
Good information, and I hope that you all enjoyed the show. And by the way, our show's on YouTube now, so you can watch this episode or any previous episodes on YouTube. Just put in Life Ahead and what our date is or our topic, and it's easy to find. Thank you all for watching us, and we'll see you next Wednesday night at 7:30. Good night.
The preceding program on PBS Fort Wayne was made possible in part by
Beers Mallers, elder law attorneys providing information on legal matters of guardianship and financial issues relating to nursing home care. Beers Mallers attorneys can also assist with Medicaid requirements and help navigate difficult family situations. Offices in Fort Wayne, LaGrange, Warsaw, and online at beersmallers.com.